Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Darren, and today I think it's worth the time to talk a bit about Shadow Priest, particularly in BFA. A lot of people are excited to play multiple different classes, and Shadow Priest is one of them that got a few changes. So, as a spec that I actually altered, as in like it was my second favorite class for a while, I would spend as much of the time as I could whenever I'm not playing my rogue, back in Warlords, and during a certain portion of Legion. How does Shadow Priest fare in BFA? And I'm definitely gonna go off the bat and tell you, I will have to re-warm up to the spec. It feels a little bit cold to me right now. I don't think I can embrace it quite yet. Blizzard did state that they want to make some changes for the spec in 8.1. I don't really know what they can really change it to make it better, but I do want to talk about the spec in its current state in BFA, in terms of PvP, but also a little bit of PvE. I mostly want to hit on PvP, what I felt like from the duels that I did, back to back, like the baseline stuff about Shadow Priest. Now, first of all, this is beta. We are talking about some early game footage. Beta is a beta is a beta. Things might happen, changes might happen. And we are also taking a look at a character that I tried to get as much extensive experience on at a 110 level. Now, the reason I feel comfortable making a video on 110 is because with my rogue, I got to level 120. And it feels like, more or less, from PvP perspective, whether I'm dueling somebody a 120 as a 120, or whether I'm dueling somebody as 110 as they are 110, for the most part, the only thing that really comes in between is few Azeroth bonuses and trinkets. But past that, the damage and the percentages of the damage against somebody of similar item level doesn't feel that different. So I got the expression with BFA that at max 120, your experiences of more or less of how you will be doing damage, what your class baseline brings against the other person are going to be more or less similar, especially helpful with the scaling technology. So it's awesome to know that. So we can take a look at what the spec is like baseline. The only things that are going to affect you is gear, trinkets, Azeroth bonuses, all these things can play into the spec. And for Shadow Priest, it's something that I'm kind of finding a little bit unnerving, especially when I'm doing these duels. Let's talk about the spec, how it is overall, what's it going to be like for PvE, as I feel like that one we can kind of hit on pretty quick. Shadow Priest currently has great damage no matter how you look at it. The spec is doing great. A lot of your talents are built when it comes to dungeons and raids in mind to accompany many different playstyles. Do you want to have a lot of easy AoE damage and being able to multi-die a bunch of people in a crowd? You can go ahead and do that. You want to have more on-demand burst for AoE or single target? You can go ahead and do that. You want to have some kind of a crazy build where you're trying to abuse and deal as much damage to the enemy as possible during a short moment? You can also do that. There's so many different ways and so much flexibility with your talents. Not all of the talents are perfect, and some of them do feel kind of hyper-specific for certain situations, but it still is great for the spec, as you'll have a lot more options and a lot more ways of approaching different situations. So overall, I feel like the spec is fine. I feel like a lot of people would say that on damage is doing great. When it comes to the actual playstyle and the feel of the spec is where a lot of people get a little bit antsy about it, and I kind of see what they mean. What I mean by feel, and I've been hammered before by people talking about feeling about playing spec. Let's take a spec a lot of us know. Destruction Warlock. You know how powerful your Chaos Bolts feel? Now imagine if your Chaos Bolt started tickling all of a sudden, and then your Imp Fireball was majority of your damage. Your Imp Fireball was doing more damage than you were. Now that would feel weird. And let's say that your Incinerate was doing insane amounts of damage, but your Immolate did nothing, your Conflagrate did nothing. So the sources of damage would be all over the place. But you still had to play up to the spec, and you still played the same rotation. It's just abilities that feel powerful don't. Abilities that don't feel that powerful are now. And I'm not talking about that they're taking away from the strongest cast and giving the power to the weakest, but that unnervedness, that weirdness that would get out of it, you know? I'm not saying every spec needs to feel like a Demo Warlock, and I would say objectively to have probably the best playstyle out of all the classes in the game in terms of just objectively a fun, a reactive, and smooth playstyle that plays off of itself very, very well. Not every spec has to be like that, but with Shadow, it feels pretty weird when it comes to duels. Your abilities still hit hard. Your Mind Blast and your Mind Flays do a lot of damage, but when you put dots on the enemy and you take a look at where majority of your sources come from, most of the damage, sometimes it just feels like putting dots in somebody, let's say in a duel, isn't worth it. Yeah, you're getting a bit of a heal from VT, but it only heals you based on damage, and VT doesn't really hit that hard anymore. So it almost feels like a waste, you know? Putting up Pain is really just an excuse just to see if you can get any procs for your Mind Blast, or maybe apparitions to fly at the enemy. Past that, you just have it there just to have it for other procs. So I guess the abilities feed into other effects, but it just doesn't quite feel as satisfying to get somebody dotted up and kind of watch him melt for a while, unless they want to make Shadow Priest less so about melting people down and more about like a mage casting spells, which I always thought Shadow Priest was more awesome when it's all dotty. But maybe there's just simply problems with the spec, as a lot of people that I was dueling, like other Shadow Priests, there was another Shadow Priest that we dueled each other and he bursted me down pretty quickly. Majority of his damage ended up being trinkets. When you have a spec where trinkets are doing more damage in a single fight than the rest of the spec, maybe then you have something going on there. And this is not to say that Shadow Priest is bad. Still, Shadow Priest does great damage when it comes to dungeon environments, raid environments, single target, AoE. It's still doing good damage, but I just feel like if they were to fix a few of the sources of where the damage comes from, you know, I would feel really weird as an Outlaw Rogue if I did no damage whatsoever until I got this trinket from this one dungeon, from this one boss, and there's a 20% chance or 10%, 5%, 2% chance that it will drop, and having to farm that over and over and over. I mean, I could see that running into some issues. Plus, it doesn't feel quite as satisfying because you wouldn't, because of a trinket proc or a trinket use rather than what your class can offer. It feels weird, but still the spec deals damage, and what I love about it though is what's amazing for it. What Blizzard has done so well is the amount of CC. Shadow Priest really does ring with me in terms of crowd control. I absolutely love it. Having a silence, a blanket silence, as well as a fear and a stun, all on relatively short-ish cooldown, between maybe 30 to 45 seconds each, really does make you feel kind of like a caster of rogues, in terms of just the amount of crowd control. You're not quite a mage that you can polymorph people back to back to back, kind of like a rogue with triple saps, but more like an Outlaw Rogue with blinds, gouges, and ranged stuns, but you're like a Shadow Priest with silences, spheres, and ranged stuns. I really do like it. The fact that there's so much crowd control, and I feel like it has so much potential for the spec. And when it comes to dueling environment, whether I'm dueling rogues, whether I'm dueling demon hunters, monks, other Shadow Priests, other casters, at least I feel like I have somewhat of tools to play around with and maybe even come out on top. That overall feels absolutely impressive. I love what Blizzard has done with it in terms of CC, and it feels great for the spec. And in terms of your talents, I guess there's more options on what you want to do with your CC, which I think is going to make the spec even more competitive and interesting when it comes to doing Mythic Plus content. You can have an AoE fear with an AoE fear bomb, or running by yourself, silences from a distance, stuns from a distance. I feel like the spec with the damage that you have might even be a lot better. Even though it's good right now in PvE and PvP, it might be even better, even more fun, not just all about trying to dot enemies and hammer damage into them, but now you can have these crazy CC chains while doing a bit of damage and dots and pa, except now dots don't really do that much, so that might feel a little bit weird. I also gotta give Blizzard the credit on survivability for a Shadow Priest. I mean, a lot of these duels I'm running around, I'm using my CC to peel for myself, that as long as I can disperse the right burst and hopefully don't die, the rest of the time I can just run around and pop Power Word Shield on myself. And when I don't have a Power Word Shield, I can actually get a few Shadow Mans in. And if I have the mana for Shadow Mans, they actually heal for a fair amount. I really like that about BFA, is how hybrid classes that have any kind of self-heal that they have to cast on themselves actually have a decent heal. And that feels really good for Shadow, as a spec that really just plays around different components. With a few other talents, like there's one where you reduce the cooldown of your Vampiric Embrace, but makes it more potent, kind of from like a legendary that you could have as a Shadow Priest. I think that's where they originally took the talent from. I absolutely love it, and as long as you can get some good single target damage with somebody, even with your pets and maybe even some instacast procs, you can really sustain yourself, and I really like it. I mean, you're still squishy like paper, because you're a clothy Shadow Priest, but still, just the amount, how long you live and how long it takes for you to die to even a class that should be able to beat you, that feels really good to play. Although, I would love to see one thing from the Artifact Open come back, the heal from your Disperse. Right now as a Shadow Priest, let's say you're dueling somebody or doing PvE content, Disperse simply can just reduce how much damage you take and stop your Insanity Drain. Past that, it doesn't have any self-heal properties. I really do like the self-heal properties of it all though. Maybe as an honor talent, if they could do that, maybe they could combine it with a more or less useless defensive talent that nobody ever runs, maybe to give people a reason to, because I feel like it's something that's missing in duels. Because the only thing you could really do as a Shadow Priest is keep Power Word and you shield yourself, maybe even catch a few Shadow Mans, but once somebody is bursting you down, if you'd miss it just by a hair, just by a second, I guess you start melting. I mean, maybe that's going to be part of the spec, is be very very glass cannony with a very punishing mechanic of defensives, but I really do miss that playstyle for Shadow Priest, to be able to get a bit of self-heal from your disperse. But overall, the spec does feel really good, and while it is clothy, while it is squishy, it definitely feels better than, at least my chances, let's say, going up against a melee, feel a lot better in BFA than they do in Legion. Overall, I feel like Shadow is a spec that's still unfinished. I feel like there's a lot more that Blizzard wants to do with it, and they did say that they want to take a look at Shadow Priest again in 8.1, so we know that Blizzard is coming back to the spec. But if you want to play a spec that's already going to be well designed and just kind of plug and play type of playstyle, plug and play type of system for it, I don't think Shadow is going to be the spec for you, if that's what you want out of the game. But Shadow Priest is supposed to be one of the specs that's going to do good damage, and there are some people out there for PvE or PvP that will play specs that simply don't feel quite as fantastic, quite as amazing in terms of, I guess, the general play style. People will play specs that are not that great in terms of feel, but the damage they put out and the effectiveness, they still might play them just for those effectiveness alone. And I definitely feel like Shadow Priest is there. It did feel a little bit like when I'm doing some of the duels there, the spec just doesn't have enough of its own oomph. Like when a Mindbender is dealing majority of my damage in a duel, or in some cases some single target situations in PvE, it just feels really weird. I mean, when you're going against a Death Knight and they have an AMS, like your shadow spells can't do anything, but in Mindbender is auto-attacking in melee, so I guess that's nice, so you can diversify the sources of what type of damage you have, besides shadow magic damage, but there's something about that just didn't feel quite as good. You know what I mean? Overall, I think the spec is in the progress, it is in the works, it isn't a spec that I think I'm going to pick up off the shelf as soon as the game comes out, though. But it is a great spec. I like the changes they're going with so far. Not my favorite, but I think Shadow still has a way to go, and Blizzard can make it great. Maybe it has to do something with the Void form. If they were to maybe eliminate that completely, I think that'd be interesting. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts on Shadow Priest. What do you guys think? Is that a spec that sounds like it's going to be good for you, or not really? I still think that this spec is going to be better if you really invest into it. I think if you get your Azeroth bonuses, best in slot trinkets, then the spec will really shine. Maybe if you can help out your gear in terms of getting better mastery, even though secondary stats are going to be reduced in terms of effectiveness for BFA. But hey, maybe if you're somebody who wants to invest time into the spec, I definitely would give it a try on PTR or in pre-patch and decide whether this is a play style you like, whether it's fun in terms of the buttons and the rotations that you press. If you find that fun, go ahead. Stick with Shadow Priest, because it's going to be fine. If it's a playstyle you don't find quite as exciting, I definitely would maybe consider leveling it, maybe as an alt, and wait for patch 8.1 updates to come out, but I'll probably be there updating you guys if anything new comes out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I would like to hear what you guys think about Shadow Priest. I think it's a great spec. It just doesn't feel quite as good to play. I feel like it has a lot of potential. It just has some congruities and things that I don't just personally dig right now. I definitely will need to re-warm up to the spec once Blizzard has their way with 8.1. But let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you want to see videos like this in terms of BFA and covering classes, feel free to subscribe. And if you're going to subscribe, you might as well hit the notification bell. If you guys want to let me know what class you want me to cover or spec in particular and what I think about it, feel free to comment. And I might just pick one that I am probably going to end up playing and or not playing in BFA. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see all of you in the next one.